In this video, I'm going to show you how to add full text search to your Flask projects using a search engine called Meilisearch. Meilisearch is used to store data in such a way that makes it easy and fast for your users to search through your data. First, I'll show you how to use Meilisearch in Python. Then I'll show you how to get it working in a Flask app. Finally, I'll show you how to connect Meilisearch with SQLAlchemy so anything you save to your database automatically gets saved to Meilisearch. I'm going to use Savala to host my Meilisearch instance, but the code in this video applies if you are hosting it yourself or on any other service. So now let's get started learning how to use Meilisearch in your Flask apps. To get started, I'm going to set up Meilisearch on Savala's dashboard. So to do that, I'll go to templates here on the left, and then I'll find Meilisearch and hit deploy now. And I'll select a region, let's say Virginia here, and then I'll deploy the template. So once I go back to the dashboard, I'll see the Meilisearch instance being deployed. So I'll just wait for the deploy to finish. Okay, and we see that it's running now. And looking here under settings, we see that the instance size is a 0.3 CPU and a 0.3 gigabytes of RAM instance. I don't think that's quite enough for Meilisearch. So what I'll do is I'll change this to S1, which has 1 gigabyte of RAM, and I'll update this. And then that will prompt me to redeploy. So I'll hit deploy changes here, and I'll wait for it to finish deploying the new instance size. Okay, so it should be done now. Let me go back to overview here, and we see it's running with this 1 gigabyte of RAM and 0.5 CPU instance. So if I click here on visit app, I should get a page. So we see status Meilisearch is running. So this means everything is okay. But for the purposes of this video, I want to be able to see what's going on inside of my Meilisearch instance. So let me go to environment variables here. And for this env here, we see it's production. What I want to do is I want to change it to be development. So I'll save that and I'll redeploy. So deploy changes here, and I'll wait for this to be done. And now it looks like it was redeployed. So if I go here and refresh, I should get a different screen, which I do. So I get this Meilisearch dashboard, and it's prompted me to enter my admin API key. So if I go back to environment variables and go to my master key here and view it, I can click on this and paste it into this input here and click go. And this will allow me to work with the dashboard. And now with the dashboard up, I'll make sure that this is still on my clipboard because I'll need it in a second. So now let's go over to my VS Code so we can connect to this through code, because that's more interesting than just viewing the dashboard with nothing in it. So to start, I have this UV project set up. So I'm using UV to install everything. So the first thing I need to install is Meilisearch. So I'll do UV add and then Meilisearch. And now it's installed. And I'll go into main.py and import it. So import Meilisearch. And the first thing I need to do is connect to my Meilisearch instance. So I'll create a variable called client. Client's going to represent how I interact with everything in code. And I'm going to use the Meilisearch that I just imported, and I'll call the client class. So I'll instantiate this. The first argument is going to be the URL for the instance, which I'll get in a second. And the second is going to be my API key. So I'll paste that in from the environment. And if I go back to the Savala dashboard, I can get the URL. So I can either click visit app, or I can just copy it here from my browser. And I'll paste it in here. And now what I want to do is I want to create an index. So an index is basically where I store documents of the same type. So let's say I wanted to store products in my Meilisearch instance. So what I'll do is I'll create an index first. So I'll call this product_index, and then I'll use the client, and then I'll call .index on it. And then I use a name. So here I'll say products. So if this index exists, it will give me the product index. And if it doesn't exist, it will create it and then give it to me. So then what I can do is I can add some documents to this index. So I'll just create a list here and I'll add 2 documents. So each document is going to be a dictionary. One thing I need is an ID. So these IDs need to be unique. So if I pass in the same ID, it's going to update that instead of create like a second record. So this first ID can be 1, and the name for the product, let's just say phone. And then we'll have a description for it. So the description will be something you can make calls with. Okay, so that's one thing I'll add into the data store. And then the second, I'll make the ID 2. I'll make the name computer. And then the description, I'll say something you can do work with. Okay. So I have those two documents and I want to add them to my Meilisearch instance. So to do that, I need to take the index that I have, so the product index, and then call .add documents on it. And then I can just pass the list of documents that I have. So now that I have that, I should be able to run this. So uv run and then main.py. And it returns with no errors. So if I go back to the Meilisearch dashboard and refresh, I should be able to see these documents inside of my data store. So first I select an index and it's selecting products for me because that's the only one I have. And we see it has two things in here. So one is the phone and another is the computer. So now that I have these, I can search. So let me comment out this and this because I don't want to add the documents again. But now I just want to search. So I'll take the product index and then I'll call .search on it and then I'll search for something. So let's start with phone. Let's see what happens when I search for phone. I'll run this and we see in the terminal here, I get one hit. I get the document that has phone in the name. Let's try searching for something. So notice that both of the documents have the word something in their descriptions. So let's see if it returns both results. So I'm running this again. And now it's giving me two hits. One is the phone and one is the computer. So the default search is actually pretty good. It's going to search all the fields that are available. Of course, you can customize this to make it whatever you need it to be for your project, but you should know that the default search is going to get you a long way. It's going to give you the benefits of using a search without you having to really think about configuring anything. It basically just works right out of the box. So we see it works here in a plain Python file, just a Python script. Now I want to get this to work in a Flask app. So I already have the basics of a Flask app set up. I have this app directory, and inside of the app directory, I have a dunder-init, extensions because I'm going to be using Flask SQLAlchemy lights. Models, I'll set up a model here, and routes, I'll set up some routes here. So let me go ahead and install Flask and Flask SQLAlchemy lights. So uv add Flask and Flask SQLAlchemy light because I need those two libraries. And what I want to do is I want to set up a route to first allow the user to add documents into Meilisearch, and then I'm going to set up something to search for that. So let's get into creating the index. So here I have a routes.py set up. I have a main blueprint already created. So I'll use that blueprint to create a route just on the index. And this will take both get and post methods. So post is going to be used for adding the records. And then I'll just call this route function index. And I'll handle the case for post first because the case for get is just going to be returning a template, which I'll bring in a second. So first, we'll do request method post. And for this particular example, what I want to do is I want to allow the user to add in books. So each book is going to have a title, a list of authors, and a description. So I'm going to set up 3 variables for that: title, authors, and description. And they're going to be similar in the sense that I just get them from the form. So request.form and then title. And I'll do the exact same thing for the other two, except instead of title, it will be authors here and description here. And notice I already have the imports here at the top. So now that I have those 3 things, what I want to do is I want to create that list of documents. So really it's just one document. So I'll do documents here, and it's just going to be one thing. And in here, I'll have an ID. So the ID can be 1, 2, it can be any integer. For my purposes, I'm going to use a random value. So from random, import rand int, and the ID is going to be a random integer between 1 and 1,000. So I'm using the random integer here because I don't have a more reliable way of generating an ID. But as we get closer to the end of the video, I'll show you how to actually get this to be a unique value guaranteed. So right now, it's probably going to be unique, but if I run this enough times, eventually there's going to be a collision. So we'll get to that in a second. So I have the ID, And this should be a list of dictionaries. So let me just put the square brackets. Okay, so ID here, and then title is going to be the title that I get from the user. Authors will be the authors I get from the user, and description will be the description I get from the users. So once I have that, I can go ahead and add it to my index. So to do that, I need to set up Meilisearch in my project. So what I'll do is I'll go to my dunder init, and then at the top here, I'll import Meilisearch. So import Meilisearch. And what I want to do is I want to add it onto my app object. So let's say after the db init app, I want to do app.meilisearch. So this way I have access to it anywhere where I have access to the app. And then this is going to be the same as what I did in main.py. So it's going to be meilisearch.client. And then I need to pass in a URL and an API key. So I don't want to put them in here like I did here because it's not good form to just put the values right in the code. So instead, I'm going to use the Flask config to store these values. So first I'll put in the values here. So app config, and then this will be Meilisearch URL. And then the other one will be the Meilisearch API key. So Meilisearch API key. Okay, so where do these values come from? Well, I'm using this app config from prefix env, which means it will automatically take in any values that start with Flask something. So Flask underscore something, and then it will add them to the config. So this will be Meilisearch URL for one, and then this will be Meilisearch API key for the other. And now I can bring in the values. So this is going to be the URL, and then the API key is going to be this here. So I'll paste that in there. Okay, so now let me go back to dunder init, and everything here looks good. So I'm putting the Meilisearch instance on my app. And that way, once I go to routes, what I can do is I can use the current app and then get Meilisearch off of it. So here, I'll do current app. So current app represents the app object for my running Flask app. And I'll do .meilisearch.index. And then for this index, I'm going to use books instead of products because I'm allowing the user to add books. And then let me just create a variable for this. So book index. And then I'll do book index.add documents. And then I'll pass the list of documents here. So just right there. And then I'll return redirect URL for, and then the same route. So this is actually main.index because I'm in a blueprint. Okay, so this should be enough to add to my Meilisearch instance. And then for this, I'll return render template for index.html. And I already have an index.html here, so we'll see what it looks like in a second. I just didn't want to spend time in the video like writing out HTML. So everything is saved. So what I can do is I will start up my Flask app. So UV run Flask run. And before I do that, let me just make sure that my Flask app is in debug mode. So now UV run Flask run. And a minor error here, I forgot quotes. But more importantly, I need to install one more thing. So UV add and then python.env. That is to pick up the env file. So now if I run this, it should be better. And we have an error with the SQLite database. So what I'll do is I'll just comment out this db init app for now because I'm not using the database yet. So let's try Flask run again. And it started. And now we have this page where we have a book manager. So for the title, I'll say my first book, and then I'll be the author. It's comma separated, but I'll just add in one author. And then description, my first book. Okay. So we'll click add book here. And we see it returns the same page. So that just means it was successful. So if I go back to the dashboard here and refresh the page, I should be able to see the new index that I have. So products and then books here. And then inside of books, we see the ID is 85. So that was randomly generated. The title, my first book, along with the description. And then we see the authors there. So it is adding to the Meilisearch instance properly. So now let's set up search. So what I'm going to do for search is I'm going to use HTMX. So if I go down here, I already have the HTMX set up to get everything to work. So hxget is going to call search and it's going to pass in the Q value. If you're not familiar with HTMX, just know it's a way to get some JavaScript functionality without actually having to write JavaScript. It's all in HTML. So I have that down there in the input, and you'll see how it works in a second. And I'm importing HTMX up here at the top. So now if I go back to routes, what I can do is I can create a route for just searching. So this will be main.routes, and this will be /search. And then the name of it can also be search as the function. And what I want to do is I want to get the value that the user typed in. So query equals request.args get, and that's going to be Q. And then I'll say if the query exists, what I want to do is I want to first get the index, so book index. And this is going to be equal to current app.meilisearch.index. And I'm getting the books. So exact same thing as this line here. And then I'm going to actually search on that index. So I can call book index.search. I can pass in the query. And then what I want out of it are the hits. So I don't need the other information. So I'll just get the hits. And if hits are empty, then I'll just return an empty list. And I'll call this results. And you know what? I will initialize results to be an empty list just in case query doesn't exist. And then I'll return a template. So render template. And then I'll call this search results.html. And then I'll pass in results. So the idea with HTMX is it's going to call something on my server and it's expecting HTML so it can merge that HTML into the page. So looking here in the index, we have this section here for search results. So HTMX is going to take the HTML from the search endpoint and then insert them into this div. So I need to create a template for the search results. So search_results.html. And what I want to do is I want to loop over the results. So for result in results, and then in for here. And for this to work in my styles, I need a div with a class called book. And then inside of the div, we can have an h3, and we'll make this the title of the book. So result.title. And then I need to have, let's say, a small tag here with the authors. So result.authors. And because it's comma separated, what I'll do is I'll call the join filter. So just joining on the comma here. And then I'll close out the double curly brackets. Then finally, I'll have a paragraph with the description. So result.description. Okay. So this should be enough to get my one book. So let me go ahead and try again. So let me reload the page. And down here in the search, I'll search for the word book. And we see it returns the results here. We see it's a little funny with the comma separated string because I only use one value. I didn't have multiple authors. So you know what? Let's just remove that join. We get the same effect without it. So let me search again for book. And now when it returns, my name looks a lot better. So of course, we only have one book in our Meilisearch data store. So that's why we can only get one response. But the idea is you don't want to store your data in Meilisearch only. The idea is you want to have a more permanent store for your data, and then Meilisearch will just be like a copy of that permanent data store. So what I'm going to do for the permanent data store is I'm going to use a database, a SQL database, and then I'm going to have it automatically add anything from the database into Meilisearch. So let's get started on that. Let's go over to models.py. And first I need to create a SQLAlchemy model that represents a book. So I'll create it here. So I'm going to inherit from the declarative base for this book model. And then the table name will just be book. And then I'm going to create some fields. So ID, title, authors, and description. And what I want to do is set up these columns. So the ID will be an integer, and it's also going to be the primary key. So inside of map column, I'm just going to set primary key equal to true. This will take care of making sure my IDs are in fact unique. And then for the title, I'll just make it simple. It's going to be string, same for authors, and same for description. Okay, so this is setting up the model. So next, what I want to do is I want to go over to my env and set up the location of the database. So I'll do Flask underscore, and then I need to set up the SQLAlchemy engines. And that's going to be a dictionary where my default database is going to be located just on my local machine. So I'll do db.sqlite3 here. And then I can go back to dunder init and uncomment that. And then I need to go into my Flask shell to actually create the database. So I'll do from.models import base, and I need app.models due to my location. And then I'll do base metadata.create create all, and I'll pass in db.engine. Okay, so that should have created my database. So this new instance folder has my database in it, and let me just go inside of there to make sure that it has the table. So yeah, we see the table there, the book table. Okay, so now let's go back to our models.py and let's set it up so it will automatically add every book into Meilisearch whenever it's added into my database. So to do that, I can use events. So first, let me import event from SQLAlchemy. So from SQLAlchemy, import events. And then I'll set up the event down here. So this is going to be a decorator because I'm going to create a function. So I'll start with event.listens_for. I'll pass in the name of the model as the first argument. So it's listening for a book. And then the event that I want to listen for specifically is going to be after insert. So there are multiple options that you can use when it comes to these events. I'm just using after insert to make it really convenient for this video, but just know you can make it much more complicated and much more robust depending on all the different types of events that can go on with your model. So I'm using after insert here. So I'll create a function called after insert, and this takes in 3 parameters. So the mapper, the connection, and the target. So I only care about the target. And because this is going to happen in the background, what I want to do is I just want to print out what's happening. So I'll make an F string here and I'll say inserting and then target.title. So the title of the book, and then with ID, and then I'll put target.id. Okay, so that should print out the information so we can see it happening. And then what I want to happen here is I'm going to do the same thing I did in routes where I create the index. So the book index here. So book index equals current app.meilisearch.index and then books. And then I want to add documents. So I'll do a similar thing, but I'll just keep it all on one line. So book index.add_documents. And then in here, I need a list, but it's only going to have one thing in it. So the ID will be target.id. So target represents the SQLAlchemy object. And then the title will be target.title. Authors will be target.authors. And then finally, description will be target.description. Okay. So what's going to happen here is every time I create a book, it's going to automatically insert that into Meilisearch. So now what I want to do is I want to go back to routes and I want to remove this code here because I don't want to insert documents directly from the routes. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a SQLAlchemy object in the route instead. So book, so title equals title, authors equals authors, and description equals description. And then I'll add them to the session. So db.session.add book, and then I'll commit. So db.session commit. And up here, I just need to import the book model. So from models, import book. And this should be enough. Okay, so let me go back to my browser. And I have this link that has the most popular books on O'Reilly. So I'll use these books to test my system here. So let me go ahead and start up everything. UV run Flask run. Make sure it starts with no errors. Okay, good. And let's try adding the first book here. So this AI engineering book, let me just go ahead and copy And for the description, what I'll do is I'll just take the first paragraph. I won't take the entire description. So let me paste that in, add book. Okay, so we see that it refreshes the page. So first, let me check my database. So select star from book. Okay, so we see the book is in the database with ID 1. And then if I just scroll up here, where was it? After this post, we see this inserting AI engineering with ID 1. So it looks like the event is being called to add it to Meilisearch. So let's go to the dashboard here to confirm. I can just refresh here. And we see that the book was automatically added. So now let me just add a few more books. Here's another AI book. So we'll be able to search for AI and get some results. And I'll take the first paragraph from here. And then let me find another book. So we'll take this book. And I forgot to start my server again, but the form should still be saved. So let me just go back and hit add book. So that should be fine. So now this is the next book, and then I'll just take one author here. And then for the description, I'll take this. Okay, so add book. So now all the books should be in both my database and Meilisearch. So I'll just search for AI down here, and we get the results. We see the 2 books that have AI in the title. Let's look for data. Let's see what we get. We just get one book that has the word data in it. Let's see, what else could we search? So applications, that looks good. So let's search for applications down here. And what do we get? All 3 books have the word applications somewhere in them. So we see building applications and designing data intensive applications. So applications are on the title, but somewhere in this AI engineering book, the word applications appears, which really isn't surprising because all these books are about application development, basically. So it looks like we have the connection between our database and Meilisearch working. Of course, you can always do the same thing for like deleting, so you can remove it from the Meilisearch instance, or updating, do the same thing where you just update the Meilisearch instance with the new information for the book that was edited by the user. So as you can see, working with Meilisearch is really easy in Python and Flask. If you'd like to try creating your own Meilisearch instance on Savala, you can get started for free with a $50 credit. Also, make sure you like this video and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more videos like this.